Good evening and welcome. I am honored you have chosen to join us at Walden Wise for our inaugural event. It could not be more timely or important. Tonight promises to be both informative and fun. You will hear from our stellar keynote speaker, our dynamic panel, and have several opportunities to engage through polls, Q&A, and culminating in your active participation in our chat lounges for a lively Walden Wise conversation. First, we'll start by introducing ourselves. Like all of you, we each wear many hats when approaching this work and community. I am Dr. Kathleen O'Brien. I am the CEO of Walden Wise, a clinical psychologist, and a co-creator. I am a mom, a clinician, and a grandmom co-creator. Walden Wise embodies my lifelong love of children, my passion for giving them the childhood they deserve, and my dedication to using science to inform techniques that support emotional health. Our vision for Walden Wise is to create an unwavering culture of emotional health. In order to do so, we convene and facilitate a community of caring adults dedicated to championing the emotional health of children. That's all of you. Events like this bring us closer to one another and to living our mission, and I'm so proud of our team's work to get us to this moment. Joining me now is one of our esteemed scientific advisors, Erik.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Erik Nook. I'm a researcher, mentor, and uncle co-creator, and I am also a clinical psychologist. I'm currently finishing a postdoc position at Yale University before starting as an assistant professor of psychology at Princeton University in July. My research focuses on emotional health, specifically how language and emotion interact with each other. I investigate questions like, how do children and teenagers learn about their emotions? And how can they best use words to manage them? As Kathleen mentioned, I'm a member of Walden's Scientific Advisory Board. I've been able to see this organization grow from just a brilliant idea into the dynamic movement that you're seeing today. And I'm so very happy to be here and to see you all joining us. I also want to take a moment to call out all of the wonderful efforts of our outstanding Scientific Advisory Board, who have invested so many hours into making the quality content that you'll be able to dive into tonight and in the coming months. As both a clinician and a psychological researcher, I see tonight as a huge step forward in creating a space where research can be shared directly with people who will use it to make a difference in the world. That's all of you. This makes tonight and Walden Wise truly special. It's a space where we can all learn from one another and do what we can to support children. With that, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Michael, your microphone's off. Can you turn your microphone on, please?
Yep, I'm good.
Thank you.
I'm a dad, an advocate, and a mentor co-creator. Now, you've heard each of us describe ourselves as co-creators. Let me tell you a little more about what that means. Members of the Walden Wise community are co-creators who proudly accept the awesome responsibility they have over children's lives. They carry their roles with intention and arm themselves with knowledge about what's best for children. We want tonight to be engaging by creating a space and a forum to make connections and exchange ideas. We'll do that through exciting speakers, a panel discussion, answering questions from you, our members of our community. Another way for us to engage is through the use of polls. And here's our first two polls. The first question that we have is, what kind of co-creator are you? And to answer the first poll, you'll have two opportunities. You can click on your screen, or you can answer over to the right on your screen, and we'll release the poll results later in the show. So are you a parent, a caregiver, or a grandparent co-creator? Are you a teacher, a coach, or a mentor? Are you a researcher, scientist, or academics? Are you a physician, a clinician, or other child-serving professional? Please take a minute or so to tell us, what kind of co-creator are you? Our next poll question is, how would you rate, on a scale of 1 to 5, how you prioritize your own emotional health? We'll share the results at the end of this first section of the program. I've seen the importance of emotional health in my own work with communities, and maybe most importantly, as a dad of 4 adult children. I've also had front row seat to the development of Walden Wise, and so this event marks a key milestone, and I want to welcome all of you to the start of Walden Wise. Over the past 18 months, we have created an organization that's really unparalleled and unprecedented in all it promises for children and adults in our lives. During times like these, it's incredibly timely that we begin this work right now. We had planned to share our Walden Wise launch video next, but I'd like to invite Dr. O'Brien to say a few words first.
Thank you, Michael. Yet another tear in the fabric of our nation. Today's tragic school shooting at an elementary school in Texas shines a spotlight on the vitally important work that we are engaged in at Walden Wise. Our hearts break for the families and the communities impacted by this loss. We need to also recognize how this affects all of our children's emotional health. Let's pause for a moment for the children of Texas and all children impacted by violence.
If you're an adult who cares about kids, you probably get the sense that something's not quite right about how they're growing up. Childhood has become hurried, externally focused, preoccupied with perfection, competition, and achievement. Caring adults want to know how to make a difference, yet have little access to cutting-edge research, hidden behind the paywalls of scholarly journals. Scientists want their research to impact the children and families at the center of their work, yet operate within systems that don't promote or share their findings. Walden Wise seeks to bridge this gap. Walden Wise is a community of caring adults, uniting to champion the emotional health of children. We believe that by making the latest research and discoveries more accessible to caregivers and families, we can learn to prioritize emotional health and better shape the experience of childhood for the kids in our lives.
For me, emotional health is having the ability to cope with life's ups and downs and having the capacity to bounce back from any setback that you may have. I want the impact of Walden Wise to be that we live in a world where children's emotional health is prioritized and that the caring adults in their lives have the skills to give them what they need to have a positive, productive, purposeful life.
As a mom, I worked really hard to put emotional health front and center, and it was super challenging. We could find tons of information about how to make them little adults, but not how to let them just be children and enjoy childhood. When I started to search for answers, I could tell that there was research that was out there, but I had to pay for it. I had to be an academic. And most of the time, even when I got my hands on what seemed like really high quality research, I couldn't get beyond the abstract because I didn't understand the jargon. I didn't have time. I had 4 little kids. It didn't have any real use in my life. It didn't empower me as a mom and as a parent to make a difference.
We describe the adult members of our community as co-creators. Co-creators proudly accept the awesome responsibility they have over children's lives, carry out their roles with intention, and arm themselves with knowledge about what is best for children. Co-creators are parents, caregivers, grandparents, aunts and uncles, as well as teachers, coaches, mentors, researchers, scientists, academics, advocates, policymakers, legislators, physicians, clinicians, and other child-serving professionals. What kind of co-creator are you?
I want the world to be different and kids to grow up where all the adults prioritize their emotional health, like really get it, that it matters, and that then the adults actually know how to do it. That looks like them being empowered with information, having the support from each other, sort of all speaking the same language and working together to make sure that they protect this really special time for kids and nurture and foster their emotional health.
Throughout the year, we will be debuting resources and experiences that will bring adults closer to each other and what works for the kids in your lives. This summer, we'll begin to explore what is emotional health and the Walden Wise guiding practices, honoring multifaceted identities, nurturing authentic relationships, and scaffolding emotional health. No matter the role you play in children's lives or their ages, we promise this supportive and inquiring community will empower every adult who influences the lives of kids to take inspired action. We're so glad you've joined our community. We hope you'll encourage your family, friends, and colleagues along on this journey too. Simply have them visit waldenwise.org and click Join the Community.
Thank you for that great video, Michael. It captures the essence of Walden Wise. Now we're moving on to the heart of our event and the reason why you are all here, to learn how adults can help kids navigate the new normal in a COVID-integrated world. Here to present our keynote address is Dr. David Anderson. Dr. Anderson is a clinical psychologist and the Vice President of School and Community Programs at the Child Mind Institute in New York. He specializes in evaluating and treating children and adolescents with ADHD, behavior, anxiety, and mood disorders. Child Mind Institute school-based programs directed by Dr. Anderson have provided clinical interventions, mental health skill building, and workshops for more than 60,000 students, educated, and parents in over 1,000 schools. He has been a contributing expert to media organizations like the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, the New York Times, and NPR. He is also a dear friend and supporter of Walden Wise. Please remember that this is a conversation tonight. As Dave is talking, please type your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them in the later portion of the program. And without further ado, Walden Wise welcomes Dr. David Anderson.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, and hello to all of you. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here tonight. And really taking the cues from the video and thinking about how we can bring research-based strategies straight to the co-creators who want to use them to support the emotional health of youth. So what my plan is, at least over the next 25 minutes, is to bring some of those strategies in a highly applicable and kind of easily digestible turnkey form to you all tonight, just as a taste of the potential of what Walden Wise might be able to do over the course of the launch and beyond. So what I plan on doing is just talking a little bit about where we are kind of in this phase of COVID, and then introducing a few skills that you can use as co-creators with the youth in your life to support their emotional health and to support your own emotional health. So with that, I want to move to an outline here of the session that we have. Going to get slides going. This is the outline slide. So we can keep going to the next slide as well. Next slide. So what we're talking about here is the impact of COVID on youth emotional health. And obviously, Kathleen was speaking earlier about, what we've seen in terms of tragic events. And today was yet another example of a tragic event where youth were affected and likely communities where youth are going to need a wide variety of support. And that's no different with COVID, in the sense that what we know before COVID was that 1 in 5 children under 17 could be diagnosed with a mental health learning disorder. And we already knew prior to COVID that about half of those youth did not receive treatment. And even when adults in their lives became concerned, the research showed that on average, people might wait anywhere from 2 to 7 years before they might seek out treatment or seek out consultation with a mental health professional. The COVID pandemic only worsened this crisis. So we watched youth experience alongside their families, loss of housing, hunger, food insecurity, and we know now at least that over 150,000 youth lost a caregiver over the course of the pandemic and were exposed to that kind of grief and that kind of mourning. We also saw major stressors across our society in terms of financial stress, the social isolation that was written about a lot in the media, learning loss that kids saw from being online or missing school, as well as increased family conflict and reports of domestic conflict at home as people were quarantined or spending a lot of time together. What we know of the research that was conducted during the COVID pandemic is that reports of distress, especially anxiety and depression symptoms, doubled. And while some indicators have returned to their sort of pre-COVID levels, we're still seeing a lot of trouble signs across kind of all sectors of society. The other point that's important to make about the mental health effects of the pandemic is that there was a disproportionate impact for low SES families and communities of color when we look at exposure to these stressors and how they might have affected mental health in communities. So we can go to the next slide. So in thinking about those impacts, there were multiple pathways of causation for the kinds of reports that we were seeing in the research in terms of this kind of doubling of anxiety and depression symptoms across all age ranges. We know that a lot of critical developmental factors regarding the availability of kind of food and housing and basic needs were affected by the pandemic. We know that availability and access to mental health care plummeted, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. And even as much has been made of the accessibility of telehealth, these still are often not reaching kids who didn't have access to these sorts of services pre-pandemic. We've also seen, and this is a slide that I made before even the events of today, but societal sources of stress and trauma, they've obviously existed pre-COVID, but have become much more a part of our national discourse and dialogue as COVID has gone on. And this has, entailed a dialogue about the effects and the intertwining of racism with mental health, of income inequality, of the effects of climate change, and of course of gun violence in our country. Additional factors that a lot have been made of during the pandemic have been considerations about social media and its effect on mental health, which unfortunately, when you look in the context of all the factors that I just described, the research indicates that these factors are incredibly important in thinking about how we promote child and adolescent emotional health. And that while social media might be a factor of concern or might be a factor of concern for vulnerable populations, it is not necessarily the boogeyman or the particularly most driving factor of some of the mental health crisis we're seeing now. So as we chart a path forward, it's efforts like we're speaking about tonight, efforts like what Walden Wise is engaging in, that are likely to be the kind of support that we will need, not only for the mental health difficulties that existed pre-COVID, but the incredible stress that COVID has brought with it and in its aftermath. So that's why, as of this past fall, many major psychiatric and psychological associations got together and declared a crisis in child and adolescent mental health. And it's also been the subject, we can go to the next slide, of the US Surgeon General's advisory report, which I encourage all of you to read, about the mental health crisis itself, the factors that affect that crisis and that shape the mental health of young people, and what we can do about it as communities, dovetailing a lot with what Walden Wise is doing. So we can go to the next slide. So the question here is, given what we know of the crisis that we're facing in child and adolescent mental health, given the fact that as co-creators, we want to support the emotional health of the youth in our communities, the question is, what can we start with? And that's really what this keynote is about tonight, is what you can start with, and then how you can broaden that with resources like you're going to hear about for the rest of this evening. So we can go to the next slide. For any wellness promotion or being a co-creator, what we think about as the kind of bedrock is forming a close relationship with the youth in your life. And these are just a few of the major pointers in thinking about how you can deepen those relationships and make sure that you have that as a bedrock when you're trying to practice skills that promote emotional health. So in that sense, we encourage adults to be available, to think about how they can make sure that there are moments during any given day in which they're putting aside phones or work or other things to be fully available for the youth in their lives, and to let those youth know explicitly that they're there to talk or they're there for emotional support. We often assume that youth know that if we're not doing something, we're available there to speak with them or to talk, but really we encourage adults to be explicit, to say, by the way, I just want you to know, the reason why my phone is down, I'm sitting here in the living room with you, is because I really want you to know I'm here. And if you want to talk, I'd love to. We think about quality one-on-one time across development. So in that sense, with younger kids, it tends to be something that people are fairly, familiar with, in that, they might just sit down with a kid while they're playing with blocks or dolls, or might be playing with Legos or something like that. And you can feel like, okay, I can spend a few minutes, in any given day in quality one-on-one time with this kid, trying to connect with them and figure out what's going on in their world. It gets a little bit harder with teenagers. And that's why when we think about connecting with adolescents, a lot of it is putting our own feelings aside about their interests, whether they be video games or music or playing an instrument or sports. And even if we don't like that sport or don't like that video game, it's being with them in kind of a non-judgmental way and cultivating that time together so that they feel like we both value the things that they value in their life, and that might make it so they're more likely to speak to us about conflicts or emotional stresses they might be facing. The next thing we think about relationship building blocks is cultivation of common interests and relationship rituals. We like to ask kids, what do you do with this key person in your life? It might be we go to breakfast, twice a month at our favorite Greasy Spoon diner. It might be that we both like the same kind of food, or we tend to play this game when we get together. But you're looking for those things that a kid can see as the sort of bedrock of your relationship and those moments when they're likely to open up to you. The next thing we think about for relationship building block is how you model how you deal with stressful situations. So in that sense, if your technology is not working as a presentation starts, what you generally think about is, how can I take a couple deep breaths, know that my initial reaction might be one of sweating a little bit, thinking that I'd like this to go well and I'd like to be able to impart, some suggestions to an audience. And then at the same time, being able to show that we're able to weather that without a ton of stress or lashing out or becoming perhaps angry with those in our circle. That tells kids that if they bring a stressful topic up with you, you're likely to react in the same way with a sort of even keel. Another thing we think about for relationship building blocks is really staying informed about the typical challenges of a developmental stage. And what we're looking for there is that oftentimes with adults who are trying to support youth, it's explicitly letting them know that you anticipate what challenges they're going to be experiencing and that you're here for it. You experience some of the same challenges, maybe, or you're going to try to keep, an open mind as to whatever challenges they're facing, and you'll try to keep an emotional even keel as well. But it's making sure that they know, here's what I expect you might be dealing with right now, and I want you to know I'm there. The last thing I'll just talk about for relationship building blocks is, youth need both nurture and structure. This is kind of the authoritative model of relationship building, in that they need you to be telling them where you think the boundaries should be, what you think you want to tell them that are the kind of the guardrails in life that you really don't want them engaging in. At the same time, they want to hear that they're appreciated. They want to hear that they're loved. They want to hear that you see the good things in them and the effort that they're making, and have that be kind of the basis of your relationship, so that when you do need to set those boundaries, you can do it from a place where they assume that the kind of mindset you're coming from is one of wanting to support them and wanting to make sure that a person you love grows up in a way that might be most beneficial for them. We can go to the next slide. So the next thing you want to think about in terms of like take-home research on supporting youth's emotional health is that after you've looked at your relationship, and the last slide might have given you one or two things to think about in your relationship with youth, it's then going to your wellness routines. It's trying to think, how with the youth in my life can I create, morning and evening routines that are predictable, or whatever routine or whatever time of day or whatever time of week you might connect with youth. How can I make sure that I'm focusing on the basic habits of wellness? Because this is often something we encounter as therapists. It's that someone will come to us and say, teach me a skill that will help me to manage my emotions better. And what we go back to is that if we're not paying attention to sleep, physical activity, whether or not someone is eating, regularly, and whatever they might define as the kind of diet that they desire, and staying hydrated, whether they're taking time to relax or engage in unstructured activities, and whether they're thinking consciously about how they construct their screen use. These are kind of basic wellness habits where no matter what coping skills we might teach someone, if we don't have some attention to the kinds of tweaks we might want to make to these basic wellness routines, it can be difficult to have the coping skills really make that much of a dent in someone's emotional health. So I encourage you, as you're looking at this slide, if you're thinking about a youth in your life or your own wellness habits and how you're modeling them, how you might be able to make small tweaks or commit to small tweaks, even following a presentation like tonight, that will either model those wellness routines for the youth in your life or help a youth to make some small change in maybe how much they move their body or how much they're sleeping or whether or not they stay hydrated throughout the day. We can go to the next slide. So if we consider the idea that relationships and then these basic wellness routines are the kind of hallmarks of what we know from the research to be the basis of emotional health, both for the co-creators who are trying to be there for youth and for the youth they're trying to support. The next thing we think of is how do we layer on the skills that we as therapists will teach youth in ways that are digestible and applicable in their lives. And that's what I'm going to talk about for just the latter portion here. So we can go to the next slide. So when we think about building these skills, sometimes people are thinking like, what's the benefit of me engaging in this? Because sometimes it's hard to get a kid to pay attention, or it's hard to get a kid to, listen to me about what emotional skills might be helpful to them. And what you want to emphasize as kind of your talking points is that the things that you're trying to do with the youth in your lives are establish this foundation for just talking about and normalizing the challenges they're facing and the feelings that they might be having. It's for you to be able to practice skills that even if you practice it when you're not stressed out, it becomes easier for them to actually practice when they are stressed out. It's kind of this idea of practicing defense off the ball, so that when you're actually playing defense, in stressful situations, you have a lot more practice in calling up that feeling of calm or that particular skill you want to practice. The next thing you're telling youth is that, if you're really trying to market this, it's this idea that skills give you choices. If you teach emotional skills, you then have more options for the way that you might respond to certain situations, the way you might respond to a partner, a friend, a parent, and the way that you might think, act, and behave. The last thing that we think about in teaching these skills is by saying to youth that you want to explicitly focus on their wellness routines, on your relationship with them, and on the skills they use to deal with stress. You're saying to them, I want to create this safe space where you can express your emotions and we can kind of workshop that together. Regardless of what challenges you might be facing, I'm here for you and I want to kind of stay a step behind you on that. So here are just a couple of those skills. We can go to the next slide. So the first, and this is fairly simple, and there's lots of resources that you'll likely find on all the skills I'm about to outline within Walden Wise, but it's just understanding feelings. It's making sure that during the day, we're taking time to check in with ourselves about how we feel and check in with the youth in our lives about how they feel. And labeling emotions, just basically, is immensely predictive of someone being able to use these skills to help with their emotional health or to deal with stress. What we want to get across as the major talking points for youth of any age is that labeling your emotions is good, that it's possible to experience multiple ones at the same time, that we experience emotions in different intensities. So in that sense, there might be a day when, for example, if you're grieving a loss, you might feel a 2 on sadness and a 7 on anger. And then the next day, you might feel a 9 on sadness and a 0 on anger. And it can be kind of inexplicable as to why emotions might vacillate in those intensities, but it's all valid. And it's something that we should be reviewing and thinking about with youth. And the last thing that we think about is how we can feel feelings in our bodies and how we can make sure that we're thinking about the ways that we connect to our physical selves. And it's not just all up here in the way that we feel emotions. We can go to the next slide. So the next skill that we think about with youth who are experiencing stress, and this is something that is front line in terms of the way that we support adolescents. So it's that when adolescents are experiencing stress, sometimes what's easier is to do something first as a way of boosting mood before you get into some of the heady kind of like abstract analysis of their thoughts and their emotions. So in that sense, when we're looking at activity scheduling, it's that we're saying to youth, before we get into like a long discussion of this, maybe we do something to decrease our stress or to boost our mood. And let's take an inventory here. Let's create, maybe when we're not in a stressful situation, an inventory of activities that we might do together or that we might do alone that we feel like boost our mood. The other major thing we think about when considering these categories and creating an inventory of activities is what might take 3 minutes, like in my case, watching an SNL skit on YouTube in a break between sessions, or what might take 30 minutes, like in my case, taking a long run in the morning or after work in the evening. And these are things where you try to think about how you can then pepper them throughout the week as a mood boost when you need them most. We can go to the next slide. So one of the next skills that we think about is, a lot of times in psychology, one of the criticisms that we get is this idea that if we teach skills, we should be able to address every single emotion. And that's often not true, or that we might be able to decrease every single emotion. To be sure, there are skills we also have to learn that help us to ride out uncomfortable emotions when we can't change anything. So in that sense, mindfulness provides one of the kind of core skills related to distress tolerance or the ability to kind of ride these waves. And what we're thinking about is, regardless of kind of how we're feeling in a particular moment, we can bring ourselves more presently to that moment. So for all of you who are sitting where you're sitting right now, listening to this talk, it's that mindfulness entails paying attention on purpose to the present moment. The easiest way to do that is to use your five senses. It's to bring yourself to an awareness of how your body feels right now, sitting where you might be sitting, or standing, or lying, to bring yourself to an awareness of what you might be smelling, or the temperature in the room that you're feeling tactily kind of on your skin, or it might be thinking about what you're looking at in this moment and bringing yourself a little more presently into that. A mindful activity for something like this would be to think about, even as I talk, or even as I speak of a skill that you might be familiar with, your mind can tend to drift. And we don't want to be judgmental of that. We want to be compassionate. We want to tell ourselves, I know my mind's drifting to either fixing dinner or cleaning up dinner, or what I'm going to do to get the kids' baths going, or what I'm doing for work tomorrow. But it's bringing yourself mindfully and non-judgmentally back to that present moment and thinking, okay, how can I be present with what we're saying right here? How can I make a commitment or an intention to change something related to my own emotional health or that of youth I support? And mindfulness comes in many forms. There's formal practices, body scans, sitting mindfulness, walking or eating very mindfully. There's also informal practices, like just trying to be even more mindful as you go about daily kind of activities. And then there's also, mindfulness that you can find, at least, through YouTube videos or recordings or apps, where you're really focusing on your breathing or your bodily sensations and trying to kind of bring yourself out of the kind of running thoughts that we might have in any given day. And the more you practice that muscle, the better it works to be able to call up that feeling in situations of stress. We can go to the next slide. So, in thinking about just the skills we're talking about today, you go back through this and think, with all the stress that we've all experienced over the past couple of years, and the way that that's disproportionately affected certain groups, communities of color, those who felt these factors even more acutely, children who've lost a caregiver, it comes back down to, you can only fix so much all at once. So in a presentation like this, where I've run through relationship building practices, wellness habits, a few different skills like understanding emotions or activity scheduling or mindfulness, it's just about setting an intention for a first step. That's what good behavioral science is about. So some of the things that we see people committing to in practice are watching TV with the youth in their life and talking about how the characters feel and solve problems. And that can be an enormous kind of lens into how a youth is thinking about solving problems in their own life. Or thinking about a challenging situation you encounter with a youth and engaging in 4 to 5 paced breaths or a breathing exercise before doing that. Practicing mindfulness exercises, doing daily routines I just referenced, tasting the food that you might be either eating as you're listening right now or eating right after this, providing time for people to engage in art or journaling or self-reflection about how they're feeling or the stresses they're facing. And then finally, what we really love seeing in families is incorporating a wellness goal of the week or the month to kind of practice together, understanding that no matter what goals we set, there are always fits and starts in our practice, but it's just about habit formation over time and figuring out how to work those wellness habits in as much as we can. We can go to the next slide. The last thing that I'll say tonight is just that, I know that I've kind of included this as kind of a side comment in much of the keynote tonight, but it's that even as we think about supporting youth in our lives, the poll question that Michael asked earlier could not be more on point. It's that it's very difficult to support youth if you are not supporting yourself or thinking about your own emotional health. I don't necessarily like the airplane analogy too much. I include it because it's illustrative for folks, this idea of putting on a mask on yourself before you put it on kids. The only reason why I don't like the analogy is that I'm a particularly scaredy cat flyer, and frequently if you're putting an oxygen mask on yourself, it suggests the plane might be in distress. But it really is something that is a powerful analogy to think about your own self-care. But it shows youth that you prioritize your own wellness and that you can support them in doing so. It helps, especially with busy adults, to really schedule self-care, to put it in your calendar as an appointment, and to try to think about how you can prepare yourself to commit to it when that appointment actually comes, and to assess any barriers that you might have to engaging in that. I think the last thing I'll say is that self-care is not just the self. And as I think we referenced a bit earlier in the welcome tonight, it's also the connectedness to a community. And it's being able to know when you need to seek support from friends, from your partner, and from a therapist. And that's something that is powerful in the sense that people often think that they know conceptually what a therapist will tell them or what their friend will tell them. And it's nothing like the feeling of validation and the kind of commitment that comes from engaging with another human being in kind of setting those intentions. So you can go to the next slide. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening tonight. I hope there's something that you can intentionally come away from and think about as a practice to start. I can only encourage you that from a brief keynote like this, there are a few skills and commitments that you can make. I'll be around for question and answers around that later on tonight. And I encourage you to think about the fact that Walden Wise has so many more possibilities and things that you can bring to create these safe, affirming, and supportive kind of spaces for the youth in your lives as co-creators. Thank you so much for listening. I think from here, I'm throwing it back to Michael to talk to you about some of the exciting things that are happening in the rest of the launch event.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson, for those wonderful presentation. You're going to hang around for a little while so you can be a part of our co-creator discussion that's happening later. But I want to ask everyone who's online with us, did you learn some new skills that you can use in your relationships with children and other people in your life? In addition to the great remarks by Dr. Anderson, there's a very healthy conversation that's going on over in the chat. So if you have the opportunity to take a look over there, you should. Some of the comments that I saw coming up during the presentation, one person had commented that skills give you choices. And I think that's a wonderful takeaway from the presentation. Also, creating an inventory of activities so you can move forward with your young person as you're trying to cope with different emotional things are very healthy ways to deal with children. We're going to continue to move forward with our program. I'm going to encourage everyone that if you need to take a break during the program, don't hesitate to do that. Just take a break and come right back with us. We're going to be with you for at least another 45 minutes, maybe longer. After we finish our next section, which is our, we're going to have our co-creators answer questions. And after that, we're going to have an opportunity for you to go to the lounges, and we'll share more information about that later. But you'll have an opportunity to sit down with several of the other people that are joining us tonight, and you can have a conversation with our experts, with our co-creators, and with our attendees. And if you have checked this evening, you may have noticed we're at close to 70 people that have joined us tonight. And in fact, we had more than 220 people sign up for the event tonight and become a part of our community. And even this evening, after we started the event, we've had at least a dozen more people hit the website and try to sign up. Of course, they can't join us tonight, but we're going to share a link to rewatch this later. And you also will all get a link to share and to rewatch if you missed any of the segments tonight. So if you need to take a break to get a glass of water, stand up, stretch your legs or something like that, do that. And please come back and join us because we have lots of great information to share as we move forward. I mentioned that we were going to share some of the poll results from earlier. So let's take a second to look back at that. And your poll results are over on the right-hand side. And there we go, right out on our screen. So most of the folks that are joining us here tonight are parents, caregivers, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. The second highest vote total was researchers, scientists, and folks involved with academics. And that's kind of the sweet spot for us, bringing the research and the scientists together with parents and caregivers is sort of the sweet spot. But we also want teachers and coaches and physicians and clinicians and everyone engaged in the activity of being a co-creator for children. And Joe, can we take a look at the second poll as well? And the second poll was, how would you rate how you prioritize your own emotional health on a scale of 1 to 5? And it seems like people are right around average or a little better than average with dealing with their own emotional health. As we move through the program, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into what Dr. Anderson shared. And our next poll questions, we're going to be asking a little bit about the emotional health of the children in your lives. So we wanted to share that information as well.